Okay, do you just want me to talk about my presentation then?
Yes, mm, I think it would be good if you can share with us your presentation as
Okay,
well your comment on your presentation and your
okay.
lecture on the plan.
And as I go through it, let's have discussion uh, as if I say something, controversial or that you want to discuss. Um, so I guess I would start with just some Old Testament passages. Uh, like there's several instances in Ezekiel in
Hmm.
which Ben Adam, translated in the Septuagint as huia anthropu, uh, son of man, is just a term for a human being. And in Ezekiel, um, God keeps addressing Ezekiel the prophet as son of man. So I think what he's saying in effect is you human being. And so it seems to be basically a term for a human being, just uh, a child of Adam. Uh, but then very influential passages are present in Daniel, where Daniel has a vision in chapter 7 in which he sees first this one who has white hair and God on the throne, the old one, the Ancient of Days. And then in the middle of the chapter, he sees in his vision one hos huios anthropu, kabar anash in Aramaic, translated uh, in the Septuagint as hos huios anthropu. So he sees one who was like a human being. And this I take to be like visionary language. You see something that seems like something else. It's not exactly like that, but that's the closest approximation we can get. Uh, and this one, like a human being, is up there in the heavenly throne room with God, the Ancient of Days. Uh, and in the Hebrew, uh, he comes to the Ancient of Days. Um, but in the Old Greek, it's interesting. I don't know what to make of this. He is hos palaios hemeron. He appeared to be like the old one of days. So he's at least in that translation, he's a somewhat godlike figure. I think in all of the translations, he is a godlike figure because he's up there in the throne room next to God and he is enthroned by God. Um, and and to this figure is given dominion and power and glory and so on. Later in the passage, those same things are given to the saints, the holy ones, dominion and power and glory, which raises the question of, who is this figure? And one theory is that he's just a representative of the holy people. Another theory is that he is the angelic representative of the holy people. So he's a mysterious figure, and he is like a human being, but we don't get exactly the phrase that we get in the New Testament. Ho huios to anthropu doesn't appear in this, or as far as I remember, any other Old Testament passage. Right? It's always anarthrous. It's always lacking the definite article, a human being. So is this a real figure or just a symbolic representation or an angelic figure? Are questions that are left open by the text. Now, where you do get this phrase, Son of Man, becoming a definite figure is in the pseudepigraphal book of First Enoch, which we don't have except for fragments in possibly in the original. Probably the original was Hebrew or Aramaic. We have some parts in a Greek translation, but it has mostly been preserved in Ethiopic by the Ethiopic Church. Parts of First Enoch have turned up at Qumran in Aramaic, except not the part that talks about the Son of Man. That's the frustrating thing. But in this section, sort of the middle of the book of First Enoch, there's a description of a figure who is obviously drawn from Daniel, but is also, the figure has moved towards a distinct personality and a distinct figure. But you can see here, I saw one who had a head of days, so that's from Daniel. His head was like wool, that's from Daniel. With him was another figure whose face was like the appearance of a man. So that's like the Son of Man figure in Daniel. His face was full of graciousness like one of the holy angels. And I asked the angel of peace about that Son of Man. And so here we do have the definite article. And the angel answers, this is the Son of Man who has righteousness. And righteousness is with him, and he will reveal everything hidden. And God has chosen him. And his lot, his fate is with God forever. And as the passage and other passages in this section describe, he is a judge figure. He will judge the kings. He will crush the sinners. He will overturn kings. And, these ones that he overturns, they not only will be confuted in the earthly sphere, they are also condemned to eternal darkness. So he is basically a judge figure who is like the figure in Daniel. He's linked with a people, but he's not just a symbol of those people. He is an eschatological judge who will come and restore order to the universe as God's agent. And I think this is quite similar to the picture that you have in many New Testament passages of an eschatological end time role for the Son of Man. And particularly people have seen this Enochic background in the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew, because the figure in Matthew also sits on a throne and judges, as does the figure in First Enoch. So, it's really unfortunate that no fragments of this have turned up at Qumran, and it's still therefore possible that the Enoch figure is post-Christian and in some way responding to Christian views of Jesus. I think most people think that's not the case, and that even though these sections of First Enoch haven't turned up at Qumran, it still was pre-Christian, but that it is a question in the scholarship. So we have all of these sayings by Jesus in the Gospels in which he speaks of the Son of Man. And very influential in analyzing them. Not everybody agrees, but an influential analysis is that of Rudolf Bultmann, who I think in a helpful way divided the sayings about the Son of Man into three categories. The first is the eschatological, end time Son of Man sayings, like we saw in Matthew. At the end, he's going to come and judge. And Bultmann thought these were the only ones that went back to Jesus. He thinks the other two categories come from the church and that they're retrojections onto the historical figure of Jesus of the faith of the church. Second category being the suffering Son of Man, and the third, a less well-defined category, earthly activity and authority. So Bultmann thinks category one goes back to Jesus, at least in some cases. Categories 2 and 3 go back to the church. And one of his most important examples is the passage that Michael mentioned a minute ago, Mark 8:38, from our passage for today, where, according to the passage, Jesus says, "Whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this wicked and adulterous generation, also the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when the Son of Man comes in the glory of his Father with the angels." So it's an eschatological saying, but according to Bultmann and others who follow him, Jesus is not talking about himself. I mean, if you didn't have the whole synoptic context in mind, in which Jesus is the Son of Man for the authors, would you really think that Jesus was here talking about himself? Bultmann says no. Jesus was talking about another figure who he expected to come at the eschaton, a figure with whom he is linked, but not identical. If you're ashamed of me, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you when he comes. So in this theory, Jesus thinks that there is a linkage between him and the Son of Man figure, but not an identity. And so this is why Bultmann thinks that at least this saying and some others in this eschatological Son of Man category go back to Jesus, because this distinction between himself and the Son of Man does not correspond to the faith of the church. So it's unlikely to be something that the church would have invented. They wouldn't make problems for themselves in this way. And another that we might think belongs in this category, though I don't think Bultmann thought so, or maybe he did, but another that may belong in this category is the saying that was central to the apocalyptic interpretation of Jesus by Albert Schweitzer, Matthew 10:23. Jesus is giving instructions to his disciples, and he says, "You won't go through all the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes." So that could easily be interpreted in the way that Bultmann interprets Mark 8:38, that Jesus is sending his disciples out on a missionary journey, and the eschaton is so imminent that they won't have time to finish before the Son of Man comes, a figure who again is linked with Jesus but not identical with him. I mean, Jesus' use of this term is puzzling, no matter how you look at it, because he never identifies himself as the Son of Man. If he's talking about himself, he's talking about himself in an indirect way. The closest he ever comes to identifying himself as the Son of Man is in the Gospel of John, which is, of course, the latest of all of the Gospels, the most theologically developed, the most influenced by the theology of the church. And here the man who was born blind, who Jesus has healed, is thrown out of the synagogue, and Jesus searches for him. And Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He says, "Who is he?" Jesus says, "He's the one talking to you." So that's more or less a self-identification, though still he doesn't say, "I am the Son of Man." But it is in the latest and the most theologically developed of the Gospels. So Bultmann would say, this is, and others would say that this is the theology of the church, which did identify Jesus as the Son of Man coming to expression. So for Bultmann, the eschatological sayings about the Son of Man are the ones that go back to Jesus, at least some of them. The other two categories are a reflection of the faith of the church, and so that would include our three passion predictions by Jesus in chapters 8, 9, and 10 of Mark. And the third category is the earthly activity or the earthly authority. This also, Bultmann thought, goes back to the church. An example would be this one from earlier in Mark. The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So now a different view of this sort of saying has been proposed by several people, and Vermesh was not the first, but he's the one who popularized it in the last 30 or 40 years. Vermesh actually disagrees with Bultmann. He thinks these are the authentic sayings, but he interprets them in line with just the general Old Testament usage, where Son of Man just means a human being. And he thinks that this Aramaic phrase, bar nasha or bar enash, which just means a human being, has been misunderstood by the gospel translators as a reference to a particular figure. He thinks that it just refers to a human being. And Mark 2:27 to 28 would be an important passage for this view. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man, therefore just a human being, is the Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath has been given to human beings, and ho huios to anthropo here just means a Son of Man, or man as a category. Man, humanity, has authority over the Sabbath. So Vermesh kind of reverses Bultmann. The third category, in a passage like this, is what goes back to Jesus, and the eschatological stuff is not part of the authentic Jesus tradition, because Vermesh's view of Jesus is that he was, a wonder-working rabbi, but not an eschatological thinker. So he has a non-eschatological Jesus, and so these are the authentic sayings for him. Okay, well, I'm almost finished. So my proposal in these two articles that I wrote for Revue Biblique is I hope it includes, aspects of what I think is valuable in these earlier treatments, but I want to claim that this phrase, the Son of Man, ho huios to anthropou, it's really a very strange saying in Greek. There are much less awkward ways of saying the Son of Man, and I want to claim that we should translate it super literally, that it means the Son of the Man, and that the man who is being referred to is Adam, the first human being, who, after all, in Genesis and elsewhere, is referred to as anthropos and as ho anthropos, as in this fountainhead passage in Genesis. Let us make anthropos according to our image and according to our likeness. And God made ton anthropon, the translation of ha-adam, after his likeness. So, and I developed this theory at great length, and I claim that the advantage that my theory has is that it can account for all three of Bultmann's categories. It can account for, let's start with number 3, the earthly activity and authority of the Son of Man. Adam, the man, was given authority over all of the earth to care for it as God's representative. And that authority is now taken up by the Son of the Man. That is Jesus as the second Adam, the new Adam. I think it can also account for number 2, because Adam, after he sinned, was subject with all of humanity, whom he includes, and so he's also strongly associated with suffering, as in especially Genesis 3. But he is also, and this idea is developed a lot in Jewish legends, especially in the rabbinic literature, but I think there is also glimmerings of it in earlier Second Temple Jewish literature. Adam also had this great glory when he was first created. And sometimes the rabbis describe, his body was like as big as the world, as big as the cosmos. And it had this supernatural glory and light. And that in some renderings, that his glory was then dimmed when he sinned, when he and the woman sinned, but it will be recovered at the end. So he will recover his his glory, and he will recover the authority that he had at the end. And so in my analysis, Jesus in these synoptic traditions is claiming to be the Son of the Man who will attain at the eschaton the glory that the first man had from the beginning. So that's what I wanted to tell you. That's my crazy theory. And you can have your screen back now if you want it.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, and I realize this may be controversial, and not many people have not many people have read my articles, and not many of those who have read have agreed, but you may be the first.
Thank you, George. Just for the matter of clarification, you shared with us Rudolf Bultmann's classification of the Son of Man sayings into 3 categories.
Yeah.
How does your theory correlate with this classification? Because you spoke about the meaning of the expression Son of Man, but you didn't dwell on your dating of these sayings. Do you agree with Bultmann's dating, or your theory involves not only different interpretation of the meaning of the expression, but also different understanding of the time when these sayings appeared?
Yes, I don't think I express an opinion in my article, and I really don't know. I mean, I think it's much easier to talk about what the synoptic writers believed than it is to talk about what Jesus believed. I do think that Bultmann's argument about Mark 8:38 is there's some strength to it. You know, that Jesus, if this was the only saying you had and you didn't have the whole gospel context, you would say that Jesus is talking about a figure other than himself. But the response has always been he was talking about himself, but in an indirect way. And I think that's possible, but this seems to me you can't ignore Bultmann's argument about Mark 8:38. So I think the case is strongest that the eschatological Son of Man sayings go back to Jesus. And especially if we think that First Enoch is a Second Temple period piece that could have been known, or traditions like it could have been known by Jesus. So he could have gotten the idea of an eschatological judge figure from the tradition. But I mean, I think it's possible he could have gotten that from the tradition and then added elements that were distinctive to him, maybe even including suffering, if he identified himself with the Son of Man, and if he thought, as might be logical, that if he went to Jerusalem, he could be killed. So I mean, as I always said to my students, many things are possible, but how can we move from possibility to probability? I mean, this is why I mostly avoided historical Jesus research and writing, because I just think it's so speculative and it's so difficult to move from possibility to probability. So that's a long answer, and the short answer is I don't know. I don't know whether all 3 of the categories came from Jesus, or maybe just number 1, or maybe none. I kind of think that Jesus did speak of the Son of Man, and that was, a part of the tradition, and it wasn't invented by the church, because we don't see it outside of the Gospels in the New Testament. Paul doesn't talk about the Son of Man. I think the only other place that it appears in the New Testament is in Revelation, where again it goes back to the Daniel, one like a son of man. So I don't think the church invented this way of speaking, and so it seems likely to me that speaking of the Son of Man goes back to Jesus, but I don't know whether he spoke of himself as the Son of Man.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I am very sympathetic with your approach that, in fact, the quest for historical Jesus cannot give us too much certain results, and that in this research we are more dealing with possibilities than with probabilities. However, as concerns the classification of Son of Man sayings into these three categories. Mark 8:38 for Bultmann, and you also called Bultmann in this way. Bultmann presents this as a parade example of the eschatological Son of Man. But is it really so? It seems that the very idea that someone may be ashamed of the Son of Man presupposes that Son of Man is not so glorious, that something happens to Son of Man that would lead people to be ashamed of him. There may be some eschatological sayings about Son of Man that do not presuppose his humiliation, and so belong to the first category. But this particular saying seems to me to belong both to first and second categories mentioned below, because outside of the image of a suffering Son of Man, or the suffering Son of Man, it is completely incomprehensible. If a glorious divine being appears to judge human beings with all his glory and splendor, the very idea that someone may be ashamed of him is so absurd. There is no necessity to make a special saying about this.
Well, yes, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is talking about two different eras, right? One era in which, again, Jesus is saying, people are ashamed of me now. He's not saying he's the Son of Man now, right? In this saying, they can be ashamed of Jesus right now, but then when the Son of Man comes at the eschaton, then Jesus will be ashamed of them, and he will, and this shame thing does occur in First Enoch. I think it occurred in one of the passages I showed. You know, this judge figure is going to fill them with shame, and he's going to, you know, do bad things to them and punish them. When he comes, so that's the second, period, the period not of his humiliation and incognito, but of the eschaton, when the full glory will be revealed. And I mean, definitely there are other sayings like Mark 14:61-62 about, you know, he's asked if he's the Messiah, and he says he is, and then he says, and you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So it's similar to the second half here. But yeah, I think you're right. It's not, this one does imply, if we're talking about one figure in both halves of this saying, which Bultmann would deny, but if we're talking about the same figure, then he is presently being overlooked or disrespected, but that disrespect will be reversed at the eschaton.
Okay, thank you. This was a question that I would have asked Bultmann if he were present here,
It's
but
too late now.
he is absent. So I just this question to you. Okay, I understand your answer. Друзья, есть у нас еще вот по материалам доклада Джоэля какие-то замечания, предложения или вопросы к Джоэлю? Это у нас уникальная возможность спросить. Ну, Бультман спросить уже нельзя, но, по крайней мере, может спросить Джоэля Маркуса.
I have a question.
Please.
Okay.
Are there any known linguistic considerations about this usage of denomination in third person as co-referent to the first person? Is there in Greek any information about that period Greek, about such usages?
Yeah, I'm not thinking of examples in Greek. Now, Vermesh thinks he has examples in the Talmud and other rabbinic literature where a person is talking about himself, but referring to himself as Bar Nasha, an indirect self-reference. But I can't think of other examples that I have seen in Greek to this very, as you highlight, it's a very strange kind of construction, an indirect self-reference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a very good question. I can't think of any biblical examples either where a person is talking about himself but referring to himself in the third person.
Except in the direct speech of God, who often refers to himself as God.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Like, for example.
For example, in a commandment that you should love Lord your God.
Okay. Instead of you should love me with all your heart. Yeah.
Yes. The commandment comes from God, but he does not say that you should love me with all your heart. He says you should love God with all your heart.
Yeah. It would be, yeah, that would be egotistical. And, you know, some pious interpreters of an earlier generation said, you know, that Jesus was too modest to refer to himself directly. So he had this modest, indirect way of referring to himself.
Yes, it's a very important topic. Any other questions to Joel?
So what do you think of my son of man as son of Adam idea?
If we believe that at some point at least it was the Daniel imagery that was the source of the Son of Man imagery, then
well, yes, but I don't think that's necessarily contradictory of my seeing an Adam background, because I think the figure in Daniel 7 has features strongly reminiscent of, and maybe deliberately reminiscent of, Adam. Specifically the glory, the divine glory that's given to him, which is again strongly emphasized in Jewish legends, but also he's given authority over everything on earth. And so I think others before have thought that at least one of the influences on Daniel 7 is the Genesis, the story in Genesis 1 to 3. But I would agree that at least for some of the eschatological sayings, the most direct influence is from Daniel 7. That doesn't seem to be disputable to me.
Yes, since what we're doing, we are doing slow reading of Mark, I think there will be nothing wrong if we make for a moment our reading even slower and just look at different occurrences of the Son of Man sayings.
Okay. I'll stop my sharing of the screen, right?
Okay. Thank you. In the Bible. I just looked through an English translation, King James Version, in order for us to be able to follow both the Hebrew and the Greek texts, the Hebrew text of the Old Testament and the Greek text or the New Testament. In Numbers, God is not a man that he should lie, neither the Son of Man that he should repent.
So you could say this is synonymous parallelism, right? And Ish and Ben Adam are synonymous.
Exactly. I think, and of course, there are a lot of expressions like Bnei Adam, sons of man, that we do not see here on the screen, where Bnei Adam are just meaning people. So there's already in the Hebrew Bible some passages where Ben Adam, like Bnei Adam, just means man or man. Once again, in Job, here, Enoch and Ben Adam are in parallel. One more place in Job where Ish is parallel to Ben Adam.
Yeah, this is Psalm 8 is an important one, and I think there you can see that Ben Adam occurs in a context which is very reminiscent of Adam, right?
Yes.
You've given all authority unto him, I think near the end of the psalm. And you've made him a little bit lower than angels. And later Jewish legends take this as a point of departure to talk about, stories in which the angels are envious of the favor that God shows to Adam, and some of them rebel against it. So, yeah, you've given him dominion over everything, right? Back a few verses, over all of
Yes,
the, yeah.
Yes, and even the classification of the fauna is also close to the idea of Genesis 1, where the fauna is classified into different categories, like wild beasts and home animals and so on and so on.
Yeah, so that's an important psalm for my argument, and I forgot to mention it, but thank you for being so more thorough than I was.
Yes, and it's very important psalm, and especially in the light of these later Jewish legends, which may well reflect ideas or concepts that emerged centuries before these legends were written in the rabbinic literature.
Well, and I want to interpret like the temptation scene in Mark, as drawing on these sort of ideas, of the jealousy of Satan because of God's, particular favor for Jesus, might explain the the sequence in Mark of first, you have the baptism scene in which Jesus is declared God's son, and then the attack of Satan. So that fits into this overall drawing on these Jewish legends about the jealousy of Adam by Satan.
Yes, it's an important place. Psalm 79/80.
Yeah, so 80 Psalm 80 might be important because, I think here, it's a royal psalm, and this royal figure is being designated, a son of man whom God has made strong. So, I don't think that there's, it is some indication that maybe the son of man terminology and royal imagery had already begun to merge in Old Testament and then in the Judaism of Jesus's time.
Yes, but it's important that the royal imagery here is not brought into the picture by the expressions ish or ben Adam, but rather by additions to these expressions. Ish, imenecha, not just the man, but man of your right hand.
Yeah, the special man, yeah.
Yes, special man, and not the just Ben Adam in itself is a reference to a kingly figure, but hiosantropohon akrataisas servoto. So it's a specific ish and specific Ben Adam who acquires here royal dignity.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah.
Then Psalm 144.
Which kind of repeats the imagery of Psalm 8, right? What is man that you are mindful of him?
Yes. People study Psalms would suggest, I believe, that this psalm is later than Psalm 8, because generally speaking, the Psalms for the last two books are believed to be later than the earlier Psalms. This means that if we have in Psalm 8 some indication of some hints to that idea of angelic envy and so on, it was at the early stage of formation of the Psalter texts.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of moves, if it is like a modification of Psalm 8, it sort of moves it in a more negative direction, like almost like Ecclesiastes or
Yes.
that language in verse 4 is, like Ecclesiastes.
Exactly. So the same expression Ma'adam v'tedehu ben Enoch v'tchashbechu, which repeats the imagery of Psalm 8, is used in a completely opposite direction. Here it is rather indication of glory of the Son of Man.
And would you say that that is probably at least directed to people who know Psalm 8 and who would be aware of the deformation that's taking place, that the author of Psalm 144 is making in that tradition?
We cannot be sure. There are a lot of passages in Psalter, a lot of cases where a line from one psalm repeats a line from another psalm, especially this well-known case of the so-called Linguistic Psalter, where we have passages parallel in other parts of the Psalter. The only difference is that in one psalm the name Yod-Heh Vav-Heh is used, while in another psalm almost the same text is retold, but using the expression Elohim, God.
So they might be variants rather than like a comment one on the other, you're saying?
Maybe because obviously that kind of editing that we see in Linguistic Psalter wouldn't presuppose that the reader should be acquainted with both versions. So probably the author of Psalm 144 did not presuppose that the reader would compare Psalm 8 and Psalm 144. But probably at least he himself knew Psalm 8 was influenced by this.
Yeah, these are always such tricky questions. I mean, I think like Benjamin Summer wrote a whole book. It may even have been his dissertation about, I think it was the reuse of, I don't know, was the reuse of something in something. And it seemed to me like his presupposition was different from what you're saying, that he thought that the author and, many later readers would have recognized the earlier traditions that the later writer was deforming. But I think it's an important methodological question.
Yes, may be true, but not always. Then we have once again whether Ben Adam here is a reference to just means a man, and this expression has a reference to some important and wealthy and powerful people just because of context. Then, of course, we have Isaiah. This is just once again just man and son of man in parallel. In Jeremiah. Again in Jeremiah. Yes. Then, of course, we have a lot of passages in Ezekiel where God addresses Ezekiel as son of man.
And what would you say in the Ezekiel passages? I mean, is he just reminding him? Is God just reminding Ezekiel that he's only a human being? Or, I mean, what exactly would you say is the nuance there?
I don't know, but even if we just look through the occurrences, the Son of Man expression, we see that almost half of this in the whole of the Bible are in Ezekiel, and all of them are in God's addresses to Ezekiel.
Yeah.
I think that the only thing that can say that there's a peculiar feature of this book that God addresses the prophet as Son of Man almost in every verse. We do not have anything parallel in any other prophetic books.
Yeah. Your window here illustrates something that I hate about this last English translation, the NRSV. He said to me, "Oh, mortal, you know, you can't, like, and this is the translation that many of our seminary students are told to use because it's the most recent, official English translation, and you can't see it's a paraphrase. It's not a translation, and you can't see the imagery that's really working there that you need to understand, when you come upon the phrase Son of Man in the New Testament. So I just hate that. Sorry for ranting.
No, I understand you, and especially since you think that in some cases this expression is a link, is a reference to Adam, then of course English rendering Son of Man does not conceal this link, this reference to such a degree as mortal does.
Yeah. Also, mortal and immortal, I mean, those aren't biblical terms. I mean, that's from Greek philosophy. No, I just think it's wrong.
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes I don't remember whether it was in the NRSV or in any other English translation. They translated the Hebrew basar, flesh, as mortal.
Yeah.
Which of course is this brings imagery from a completely different world.
Yeah. No, I hate that translation too. Yeah.
Okay, but then let's move to our beloved Gospel of Mark.
So Mark, I think Bultmann would say this one is earthly authority and power, right? Category, whatever that was.
So Bultmann have said that this is a creation of the early church, which wanted to assign this dignified name to Jesus.
Yeah, and the power to forgive sins. I mean, I think you can see how an argument can be made for that.
Yes, and Vermesh would say that this is an authentic saying, or at least that the usage may be authentic because what this verse is saying, according to Vermesh, is not that.
I'm not sure. I mean, Vermesh is very eclectic, in which passages he treats. I'm not sure if he treats this one, but I think you can give a Vermeshian interpretation saying that no, Jesus says that humans do have the power to forgive sins. Well, and after all, God is really the one who's forgiving sins, and he's just declaring that the man's sins have been forgiven. Like Jesus just says, your sins are forgiven. He doesn't specify an agent, right? I think that's how you could get out of it.
Yeah, Jesus just says, your sins are forgiven. You
could interpret it as a divine passive, right? God has forgiven your sins.
Then Jesus' opponents say that only God can forgive sins, and Jesus replies that man also has power to forgive sins.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay, there's a clear opposition here between God and Son of Man, but within the logic of the Gospel of Mark. Do you think that this saying here refers just to a man has power, or within the Gospel of Mark?
No, within the gospel. No, I should have made that clear. I think that for Mark, Son of Man does not mean just a man, but Jesus as the Son of the man, Jesus as, and I do think that in Mark, Son of Man and Son of God are more or less synonyms. They all come together in 1461 to 62 at the trial scene. So no, that's not what Mark thinks Jesus is saying. That's what people like Vermesh think that he's saying. That it's just that humans have the authority. But I think it's a little bit difficult in this case. Not as easy as the next case, 228, which is it's the best passage I think for Vermesh's case.
Yes, I agree. This eschatological Son of Man or the suffering Son of Man?
831 is the suffering Son of Man, obviously.
But he's also going to rise again.
Yeah, right. So maybe it's better, and maybe I say this in my article, it's, suffering and rising, though the emphasis is, at least in terms of the number of words that are ascribed to it, there's more emphasis on the suffering.
Okay, so up till now, we do not have any references to any cases of where someone would be in the first Bultmann's category. Here we come to.
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, it's followed in Mark though I'm not sure, that this connection was original, but it's followed by 9:1, where he says that there are some who won't taste death until they see the kingdom of God come in power. So that's also, maybe an originally separate eschatological saying that has been, brought into this context.
Okay. That's just the passage that we have been discussing during our last meetings. Can we separate 131 and 138?
I mean, they are pretty close to each other.
Yes, but according to Bultmann's classification that we started with, 131 is a very clear example of second category, while age 38 is the main representative of the first category.
Yeah, a very important one in the first category.
But
I mean, it's important for him because of the distinction, that Jesus seems to be drawing between himself and the Son of Man in his interpretation.
But yes, but isn't age 31 a kind of explanation? Why should people? Why can people be ashamed of the Son of Man? Yes, because he will be humiliated and tortured and ultimately killed. So that without the background, okay.
No, I think that's a good observation. But still, the being ashamed happens like on this side of the eschaton, and Jesus being ashamed of them happens on the other side of the eschaton. So it's, the time of incognito and suffering versus the time of glory.
So according to Bultmann is not with us, but you can reconstruct a Bultmannian paradigm. According to the Bultmannian paradigm, this was regional, and this saying drew some distinction between Jesus, who was saying this, and Son of Man, who would come.
Mm-hmm.
And then age 31 was, in some sense, a back formation from age 38 made by the church, which identified Jesus with Son of Man, and
yeah, and I think Bultmann would say, first, the church remembered Jesus saying things about the Son of Man. The church first, which were eschatological in nature. The church then identified Jesus with the Son of Man that Jesus had spoken of in this eschatological context. And then, in a separate step, the church wanted to show that Jesus' death didn't catch him by surprise. So it formed these prophecies after the fact, in which Jesus unhistorically predicted his suffering, death, and rising after 3 days. That would be the theory.
As you have said, there are a lot of possibilities here, but not many probabilities.
Well,
okay.
That,
Then once again,
as we say in English, that's the whole ball game. I think moving from possibility to probability.
okay. And what would Bultmann say about 9-9?
Well, I'm not sure. You mean which category does it belong in?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I guess he might include it with the prophecies of suffering and death.
Yes. So suffering, death, and resurrection, these topics go together in the Bultmann paradigm. Okay.
I guess so. I mean, I think he might see it, and I think probably many people do see it as maybe something that comes from Mark, because it plays into Mark's wanting to contrast the time of Jesus' earthly life with the new era that begins with the resurrection.
You mean Mark wants to contrast these two eras?
I'm not sure what Bultmann says about 9-9, but I think a lot of people think that 9-9 is maybe a creation of Mark. Because, well, I'm not sure exactly why. I mean, it's dealing with the problem. It's dealing with a problem that was a problem for the early church. If Jesus was the Messiah, who is John the Baptist? And what's John the Baptist's relationship to Jesus and to the Elijah figure?
Okay. The first Son of Man figures prominently in all the predictions, in all the three predictions.
Yeah. Now, I guess 1045 belongs in the earthly authority and power, though it does. I mean, I think this is an interesting one, and I guess we'll get to it eventually. But I mean, it seems to me like it's drawing on the Daniel 7 imagery, but it's reversing it, right? Because the figure of the one like a son of man in Daniel 7:13 and 14 is served by all the angels. And, there's all this language about others being subordinate to him, both in Daniel 7:13 and 14 and Daniel 7:27. But this is saying the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. So, I mean,
yes, but this saying goes quite well together with other predictions of passion. No?
Yes, sure, yeah, it's informed by that whole idea, that the Son of Man must suffer. But I mean, I would think that people who were biblically literate would have picked up that it was a reminiscence of Daniel 7, but also a reversal of it. I mean, maybe that's ascribing too much subtlety to them. But it's very striking to me.
Yes, but here once again we see that the Bultmann classification of the Son of Man sayings into three different categories is very problematic
Well, it
because
works, yeah. It works better for some than for others, I think, yeah.
because here once again we have a saying that is belongs both to second and third category.
Yeah.
Okay. This is of course the best example of this scatological Son of Man.
Yeah.
Mark 13. Do you think that in Mark 13, Son of Man is identical with Messiah Christos?
Yes, for Mark, certainly, yeah.
Oh.
I think throughout Mark, Christos and Huios to Anthropo are synonyms.
Okay. Once again, that's about suffering, Son of Man. And here, of course, for Mark, this is one of the most clear reference cases where Son of Man and Jesus' mouth is a reference to himself, almost like first person pronoun.
Right.
And what can we say about this last occurrence of Son of Man?
Well, I think it is, again, it's very reminiscent of Daniel, where, I mean, in Daniel, by implication, God is enthroned in the heavenly throne room. And then it says something like, I watched and I saw until thrones were set up, and one like a son of man came. I think if you go back to like 9:7-9 or something like that.
Do we see Daniel 7 now?
Yeah, Daniel 7:13, you see.
Yes.
In the various versions. But, by implication, I think the one like a son of man is enthroned, though I don't think that's said explicitly.
The main problem with linking Anthropo imagery in the New Testament with Ahos Anthropo imagery in Daniel is that Ahos, because in Daniel you have a lot of passages where angels are referred to as beings which resemble men.
Yeah. Well,
For
that's
example, wait a second.
well, like the three men who come and visit Abraham too in Genesis.
Yes, but that's 10. 10:16. Yes, 10:16. Hinne Kidmut bne Adam. Angel is described as someone who looked like man.
Yeah. So this is what, John Collins thinks that one like a son of man in Daniel 7 is like the angelic representative of Israel, or the angelic guardian, or something, like Michael or somebody like that, or maybe even identical with Michael.
Yes, Daniel 10:16, and then the same imagery we see in for example 8:15 and 16. When angel appeared before Daniel, the angel has the appearance of a man.
Yeah.
Gavar.
Yeah. Though that language also reminds me of Genesis, right? About the
Yes,
marta.
but at least in Daniel, all these beings that are looking like man, they are angelic beings, and
Yeah.
they are always referred to as beings looking like man.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what I was saying before about this visionary language. You can't really grasp, divine things. What you see is something that looks something like something else that you understand, but it's not exact. And I think, Ezekiel is the most
Yes.
Like exaggerating, where he says something like, I saw what seemed like it was the similitude of the likeness of the form of God, really distancing language to get across that you can't really describe what God looks like.
Yes, what I just wanted to say is that there is an important difference between the imagery of Daniel and the New Testament imagery. And namely, in Daniel, the different angelic beings that are called looking like Son of Man, looking like man, having the appearance of man.
Well, that's why the Enoch, corpus is so important, because it's not just using that like language, but usually in the Ge'ez, it's that Son of Man, so so that bridges the gap between this vaguer language in Daniel and the more concrete language in the New Testament.
I don't remember. Do we have any images like this in Hebrew or Aramaic Qumran texts?
You mean based on like Daniel 7?
Yes.
I can't remember. If we do, it's probably debatable. None spring to mind immediately. There's various descriptions of glorious figures in some, I think, mostly fragmentary texts. And I'm pretty sure if there were something at Qumran, that was well known, I would know about it. Because, I'm always looking for stuff like that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joel.
Well, I thought that would be a short presentation, but yeah.
Yes, you made a short but very impressive presentation.
I mean, it's such a complicated subject, and I think probably more has been written about Son of Man than just about anything in New Testament,
Yes, that's true.
or at least in Gospels.
In your presentation, as well as in your paper, your two papers, you brought the Genesis imagery from the first 3 chapters into play. I think it's a very interesting suggestion.
Well, I think that is a pretty important passage, Genesis 1 to 3. So anyway, maybe 100 years from now, if there's still biblical scholars, somebody will go back and read my article and have what we call an aha moment. Or maybe even one of your students.
Okay.
Revive my ailing theory.
Yeah. This year with our new students, we're mostly doing Old Testament things, but next year we'll do New Testament with them, and I think we'll have opportunity maybe to look at some new issues of the New Testament together, or to invite you to join our seminars on the New Testament.
That would be great.
Okay.
Well, I have to depart with the clouds of heaven.
Okay. At what time are you going to depart with the clouds of heaven?
I cannot predict it. You don't know the hour or the time, but it will come.
Okay. We all know that this is the fate of every son of Adam.
Yes. That we can be sure of.
But still we have some hopes based on the text that we are reading and
Yes.
commenting upon. I think this was a very important meeting today, which was not devoted to any particular verse, but rather to the image that is important for understanding a lot of verses, both in Mark and in other books of the Bible.
Yeah, well, I think we'll keep coming back to this. So.
Yes. So I thank you, Joel, for making this presentation, and I thank everyone for being with us today.
Okay. Well, think about it and tell me why I'm wrong. So.
Okay. So we continue our slow reading of Mark next